Well, thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have coming up for you. Brexit showdown. UK Prime Minister Theresa May tried to sell a draft deal and save her own skin at the same time. Devil in the details, the latest leaks from the agreement, plus reaction from Northern Ireland. Deep fakes as Parliament debates election interference. We show you the latest technology trying to sway votes. What have you done for me lately? Parliament launches a new website singing its own praises. And in tonight's Raw Moment, it's Mr. Blobby, your new Brexit correspondent. All right, it is time to meet our panelists for tonight. We have, of course, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor here at Euronews. Darren, what's the biggest story for you?
I don't know whether I should be more worried that I'm going to be replaced by Mr. Blobby or artificial intelligence, but it has to be Brexit, I think, not least of all because considering all the reports we've had today, it seemed that May was likely to get this through Cabinet this evening. And then, as we've come on air, we've just learned that actually this Cabinet meeting that was due to wrap up around now is actually not likely to wrap up for at least another 2 hours. And I don't think that spells good news for the British Prime Minister.
Of course. That's something we're all been watching tonight, of course. And watching with us tonight is John Proctor. He is a Conservative British MEP from the ECR group here in Parliament. John, which story are you watching?
It has to be Brexit also. It's the only show in town in Strasbourg, and we'll await to see what comes out of the Cabinet meeting.
All right. Of course, everybody is watching Brexit tonight because Theresa May, she's having a cabinet meeting tonight, meeting all of her cabinet members, trying to present the deal, trying to get them on board and to agree with her. But Theresa May earlier, she did face her opponents in the House of Commons. It was quite dramatic. Let's take a look.
The Cabinet, Mr. Speaker, will meet this afternoon to consider the draft agreement the negotiating teams have reached in Brussels, and the Cabinet will decide on the next steps in the national interest. I'm confident that this takes us significantly closer to delivering on what the British people voted for in the referendum. We will take back control of our borders, our laws and our money, leave the common fisheries policy and the common agricultural policy while protecting jobs, security and the integrity of our United Kingdom.
It breaches the Prime Minister's own red lines. It doesn't deliver a strong economic deal that supports jobs and industry. And we know they haven't prepared seriously for no deal.
I mean, before we started, we went live on air. I mean, John, you were saying that actually nothing is happening. So I'll go to you first, Darren, because we're journalists. We're watching every little thing that comes out of it. What is happening? Is there anything happening, in fact?
Well, there is this Cabinet meeting clearly where they're going to have to sign off this deal or not. Now, as I say, the expectation is, given the fact that we're nearly 24 hours since we've heard that a draft deal is on the table, that the Cabinet were likely to sign it off. The mood was, despite what we've heard from Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg, and indeed even from the DUP in Northern Ireland, that actually Cabinet Ministers would fall into line, that ultimately they would leave it up to Parliament to decide, and that parliamentary vote would probably be next month, and that the choreography for the next week would kick into place. Now, that is still entirely possible, and that it means Dominic Raab travelling tonight to meet Michel Barnier to literally shake on the deal. Then we've got this ministerial meeting of foreign ministers next Monday in Brussels, and ultimately next weekend, so November 25th, the Sunday, that is when EU Council leaders, including Mrs May, would sign on the dotted line and the deal would be in place, at least between London and Brussels, and then Parliament in the UK gets to decide. But all I would say is we may well still be on course for that to play out. What is interesting is that Downing Street clearly thought this was over because there was speculation that Mrs May was due to speak around now. That is not happening. And all we can conclude is I don't think that's necessarily good for Theresa May.
All right, I'll ask you, John, do you think anything is actually happening, or are we making a big deal out of nothing?
Well, something's clearly happening in actual fact. Look, I was on your programme 2 weeks ago. Everybody was saying then that there was going to be no deal. There was going to be no likelihood of a deal. And yet, here we are. Theresa May has brought a draft deal back to the UK. It's been extraordinarily difficult for her to do that. But we've got a deal, and the Cabinet is considering the content of that deal now. And I'm absolutely delighted that that's happened in actual fact.
Will they back it?
Well, whether they back it, well, let's wait and see. What I find amazing is that commentators have been speaking all day long about the content of this deal without any of them actually seeing it. Let's see the deal. Let the Cabinet scrutinise the deal, and let's see what they've got to come out with.
We're actually talking about the actual substance of the deal. That is pretty important that we haven't actually...
No, we haven't seen it, and we are expecting that when... or if, I should say, the British Cabinet do send it off, that 500-page document that it now is will be released, and we will get to see the details. I mean, I think we can conclude from what has been leaked, we have to assume that the leaks are right, that, there will be a UK-wide customs arrangement, which Britain will be in. It's been compared to this swimming pool analogy with Great Britain in at the deep end and Great Britain in the shallow end and Northern Ireland in at the deep end. But also Rouse, which clearly has not pleased the DUP in Northern Ireland, who are propping up Theresa May's government in a confidence supply deal, but also concerned about the mechanism, about whether Britain will be able to unilaterally essentially end this customs arrangement. And also, I must add, we've heard from the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair this afternoon. Listen to this. This is what he said in his speech today. He said, talk to any of the EU officials privately. They say Britain has basically caved in. He says, I take my hat off to Ollie Robbins. Ollie Robbins being the man who negotiated on behalf of Britain, one of the most senior civil servants. Ollie is a very skilled guy. The elaborate camouflage of all the different points is a tribute to the skill of the British civil service. I say that sincerely. Now, Tony Blair is clearly being mischievous there, but the Brexiteers fear he is right. They fear that ultimately this means Britain may now be locked into a customs arrangement beyond the transition into the future, that the future trade deal will be based on this draft deal.
Exactly.
And that means Britain is essentially tied to the customs arrangements for years, maybe decades to come.
Do you agree with that? That is essentially throwing in the towel from the UK side?
Tony Blair is a Labour Party politician, for goodness sake.
Could he be right?
He is determined that the UK will stay in the European Union. He believes that this government, my government, should disregard a public vote that voted to leave. Frankly, it's a nonsense. And he's on the sidelines causing mischief. He is not delivering for the people of the United Kingdom. Theresa May has brought a draft deal back to the UK. Let the Cabinet scrutinise that deal. I'm hopeful that they will support the Prime Minister in her efforts, and then we can move on.
All right, I will get back to all of those points, but first let's get the other side of the story, because as you were mentioning, the other European countries, obviously they have an opinion on this. We have RTE Europe editor Tony Connolly, who broke the story yesterday on that EU-UK deal. He basically scooped all of us, and he's joining us now from Brussels. Tony, good to see you there. So the EU chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, he has briefed the EU 27 ambassadors today. So what is the latest from Brussels, from this side?
There's a certain choreography here which will see the EU 27 ambassadors being briefed. I'm told that they have had to leave their phones and iPads and so on and devices outside the room for fear of leaks, but they won't take a definitive position until they get that signal from the Cabinet in London that this deal is over the line and Theresa May has got her mandate to come to bring this forward. And at a certain point, we expect Dominic Raab, the Brexit secretary, to rush to Brussels to meet Michel Barnier to have that all-important symbolic handshake to seal the politics of this. And then the details of the text will go back to national capitals. They will put it through their own machinery. Each leader will then take their own position on this. And if the choreography goes according to plan, we'll have a European summit on the 25th of November.
It's true that the EU ambassadors were saying that the ball is in London's court, the story is in London, but do you get any sense, I mean, you have your sources in there, do you have any sense of what their feeling is with regard to what London is going to do?
Well, they're watching with bated breath and in a sense, while they understand the dynamics of the negotiating room and the two teams of negotiators, whenever they talk about what happens in London, they say that's an entirely different dynamic, a different creature altogether, and it's very hard to predict. But as far as a number of sources I've spoken to are concerned, they feel that this is a balanced deal. The UK has to be in this customs union if they want to avoid a hard border, or if they want to avoid a backstop that's specific only to Northern Ireland. As one diplomat said to me, look, it gives them tariff and quota-free access to the European Union with one foot in the single market. So the condition is, or the precondition is, that they will have to accept some kind of compliance with EU rules and regulations, and that's a natural thing. So whether this is a vassal state, as Jacob Rees-Mogg would say, or something that is a normal transaction, that's really in the eye of the beholder. But the view in Brussels is that this is as good as it gets for the United Kingdom. All
right, Tony, you were saying that everybody is tight-lipped, including Irish politicians. They haven't been saying much at all. What about the view from Ireland? I mean, you have well-placed sources there. What sense are you getting from them?
Well, the Irish government has been extremely careful not to make any public pronouncements about this. They don't want to be seen to be in any way claiming victory or gloating or whatever. But the view that I'm getting is that they are largely content that this text would, in their view, protect the Good Friday Agreement, protect the peace process, and protect their red lines. Now, I say that knowing that we haven't seen the text in detail, so we'll have to reserve judgment on that. But the fact that Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, is going to put this to a vote in the Parliament next week, the Irish Parliament, the Dáil, suggests that he's pretty confident that what is in this text is something that matches closely the Irish government's objectives in this.
All right, thank you very much. That's the Irish broadcaster, RTE's Europe editor, Tony Connolly, joining us there from Brussels. John, I'd like to go to you. I want to talk about Theresa May again. Do you think she is in trouble at this point if she has a lot of opposition to this deal?
I don't think she's in trouble. Anybody who knows Theresa May knows that she's a very calm, collected individual. She takes her time and she's considered in her approach, and I think that's shown throughout all of this process. It needed level heads, and whilst there are lots of people in the media world who may disagree with that view, the fact of the matter is that that's what we've seen. We've seen today commentators commentating on every possible scenario you care to think of. What's actually happening in reality, though, is the Prime Minister is walking through this draft agreement with her cabinet. That's how you go about doing serious politics. I
think what's happening in reality is that, yeah, this is obviously, I think, the most crucial moment for this process, probably since the general election last year. You know, the kicking the can down the road has come to an end. Yeah, will she win round the cabinet? It's looking like she probably will tonight. Has she got a deal? She has. And on that, many people would be surprised because she's gone and done a lot more than people thought it was possible to do. However, what was the most difficult aspect of this, and always has been, is can she get support within Parliament? And on that, you know, you'd have to say, if you look at the numbers, it's looking really, really difficult because we've got potentially, if they stick by what they've been saying today, 10 DUP MPs who've said that they cannot support this. We've got essentially people like every Brexiteer from Boris Johnson to Jacob Rees-Mogg to Peter Bone suggesting that they can't support it either. Labour are opposed, the Lib Dems are opposed, the Scottish Nationalists are opposed, Plaid Cymru are opposed. Essentially, everyone is in opposition.
I think someone from DUP was saying it's mathematics, as you're saying.
It is, and even some Remainers within her own party, like Joe Johnson and Dominic Grieve, suggesting they can't. If that is true, if the people who've said today that they cannot support this deal is true, she will not get it through.
The numbers are incredibly tight. That's always been clear. Don't you think it's rather strange, though, that all these people are saying straight off that they're not going to support something they've not even seen? This is ultimately going to be about politics now, and people are already making their minds up on something they've not seen. They don't know if this deal is going to be good for the UK or not. In actual fact, they're saying that they want to try and bring down this government. That's what this is really all about, and it just shows some people for what they really are. They're not interested in the national good, and ultimately, that's what people have. That's what people have to reflect upon when they go and vote.
And Arlene Foster was just saying that Theresa May promised not to break up the UK, and if she does, there will be consequences.
I don't believe for a minute that the Prime Minister is breaking up the UK. The issue's always been difficult in terms of not having a border within Ireland. That was always going to be a really difficult nut to crack.
But it is interesting today, the Prime Minister of Prime Minister's Question Time, you know, what has she always said is that the backstop, OK, so she's one that it's now going to be UK-wide rather than specific to Northern Ireland, though there will be aspects that will be seemingly specific to Northern Ireland. But she always said that it would be time-limited. Now she's suggesting it's temporary. You know, those subtle changes of language do matter. And it does appear that as long as, from what the DUP can read into this, that one of their red lines has been crossed.
what they can read into it. They've probably got a crystal ball somewhere, haven't they? Let's see the agreement, and then let's make our judgment.
If the backstop is not time limited, essentially, then they cannot vote for it. You have to accept that.
We can go on theorising about this all night long. It gets us absolutely nowhere. Let's wait and see what's actually. Let's wait and see what's actually in the agreement. That's what we want to see. We want to see this agreement. I'm confident that Theresa May's cabinet will actually back her.
Well, all right, that's something that
we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait. This process at least has been unpredictable, so I don't expect that to end anytime soon.
No, not at all. We'll be talking about it again and again. All right, now with the UK heading for the exit, Euroscepticism is a major headache for the EU. But don't worry, I think they have found the answer. Let's take a look at today's Power Play.
Under more pressure than ever before, the EU is keen to get the word out about the advantages of remaining in the bloc. Cue European Parliament President Antonio Tajani, who today launched the fight back against Euroscepticism with a website.
E punta proprio a spiegare in maniera semplice e dettagliata attraverso i social media cosa è stato fatto regione per regione, cosa è stato fatto per cambiare la mia vita.
Catchily titled What Europe Does For Me, it allows curious Europeans to discover how their money is being spent. For example, did you know that the EU contributed 27 million euros towards the building of a cable car over the River Thames in London? And Brussels helped to fund a project restoring the archaeological site of Pompeii in Italy. So, is this vital PR work or shameless propaganda?
Okay, A for effort there, but is it too little, too late? You were shaking your head.
To answer your question directly, I think it's shameful propaganda in actual fact. If the EU's doing positive, good stuff, people should be able to see it directly. I don't see there's a need to put up a special website for it, for goodness sake, and try and push this propaganda out to people. I think in the UK, people simply think, yet another example of the waste of taxpayers' money.
Well, no, but I think it's really important that taxpayers know where their money is being spent. Interestingly, of course, that cable car in London, some people may have used it, very few people do. It was a pet project of Boris Johnson, a man who campaigned to leave the European Union. I grew up in Ireland, actually. They built an awful lot of roads in Ireland, the European Union, and they put signs up telling people they'd built roads.
So no need for the website,
but that's effective. But in the UK, for example, you don't get that. And actually, the European Union have funded, particularly in deprived areas of the UK, they have spent an awful lot of money, and lots of people do not know. They don't know.
Maybe now it's a bit late, but if I'll ask you, 5 years ago, if this had been the case, that they had been effectively communicating what the EU is doing with their money, would it have made a difference in terms of Brexit, for example?
Well, you do get that because it's a condition of the EU funding in the first place that you put a great big whacking sign up that says the EU has funded this. In any event, so that happens in the UK as well. I don't think it would have had any effect over Brexit whatsoever. I just think it's yet another example of the waste of taxpayers' money that actually people in the UK are sick of.
OK, to win hearts and minds then.
I think just on the very basic principle that the more European taxpayers can know about where their money is spent is absolutely fine.
But is this the best way to go about it? They're trying to win hearts and minds, and then you go online to read stuff.
Considering the best way to access information these days is online, I think actually it's probably quite a good idea. More governments, potentially national governments, should do the same.
I mean, we're talking about...
No?
Okay.
What is the good of simply just pumping out good news? People are not that easily convinced.
It's not good news. It's about transparency,
valid, about work.
And about where European taxpayers know that their money is being spent.
I agree in terms of transparency. Have a section within the existing website of the Parliament. What's the need for this?
Well, I mean, this is, you can see that it was more user-friendly. It is more accessible. I mean...
Maybe, and maybe not. You're not convincing me, that's for sure.
All right. Well, let's see. It's just been launched, so let's see what the reaction will be like. All right, coming up on Raw Politics, 3 films, 3 themes dominating European politics. We'll tell you which one came out on top, winning the prestigious Lux Prize today. Plus, can you tell if this is real or fake? The new front line in the fight against election influence and interference. Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, the European Parliament held a debate today on an issue becoming more urgent by the day: how to fend off foreign interference in next year's European elections. Now, the spread of misinformation and troll farms were high on the agenda, but as MEPs debate, a newer threat described as fake news on steroids is coming. So-called deep fakes use artificial intelligence to create a bank of patterns in voice and facial expressions, and they can essentially be used to make anyone seem to be saying anything. Let's take a look.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time. This is a dangerous time.
You know, when I said in 2004 that there were no red states or blue states, they're the United States of America, I was wrong.
Well, that was clearly not Barack Obama. And now with me in the studio, and I can assure you it really is them, we have Jan Zahradil. He's a Czech MEP, and he's also the ECR group's candidate to be the next European Commission president, and Marietje Schaake, Dutch MEP from the D66 party and the ALDE group. Right, when we see something like that, and I think that's just a small example because there's a lot more on the internet. How worried are you? I'll start with you, Marietje. How worried are you about this threat?
I think the broad threat of interfering in elections and really stealing the right of people to vote for their representatives by secret ballot and universal suffrage is very serious. And there's threats from many sides. I mean, from foreign entities, but also through the business models of social media that are really distorting the public debate, eroding trust in liberal democracy. So we have to be ahead of the curve. And I think the deep fakes that you mentioned are that next curve. The examples that we saw, they're not brilliant yet, but the technology is moving fast. And if somebody has enough resources, they can already produce a very, very hard to detect alternative, deep fake of someone. And just imagine what it would mean if there would be a video out there of, you know, a president declaring war.
Exactly.
And even in 10 minutes, that can lead to enormous confusion and even a counterattack. So we have to be very vigilant when it comes to the very essence of our liberal democracy.
Yeah, and when you saw that, I mean, what did that make you think? Elections are coming.
I saw that piece already, and the truth is that this one is far from being perfect. I never believed that this was a real Obama.
But it's getting better. The technology is getting
absolutely.
better.
It'll improve, and new technologies are here. We have to fight this, definitely. And this is a shaky ground, because on one hand, we can develop some counter technologies. On the other hand, we should be very careful not to go too far in curbing the freedom of speech or freedom of expression. So, yeah, it'll be dramatic. It'll be difficult. For instance, I have serious doubts whether European political parties, for instance, that they will run in the elections as well. You mentioned me like a Spitzenkandidat of the ECR, and I have doubts whether European political parties have been able to meet those challenges and to make some devices and to
Why do you say there's a risk to
technologies.
freedom of expression when we're talking about deepfakes? What is the risk there that you're talking about?
Well, we have various servers that are at least suspicious, or that could be considered to be suspicious, that could have some unclear background, and that could be even investigated. But on the other hand, we can have also servers or news, some newspapers that can be perhaps only critical.
I suppose you're talking about misinformation rather than making someone say something that they're not actually saying.
Sometimes it's not that easy to make a clear distinction between what is real misinformation and fake news and what is just a pure and justifiable criticism.
Well, just look at last week. From the White House, we saw a video that was tampered
of the journalist
with being presented as authentic, right?
So this was a CNN journalist with the White House intern. Yeah.
That's right. So the White House actually presented as authentic a video in which it seemed like a CNN journalist had been, you know, very aggressive towards someone working at the White House.
But it was altered in some ways and therefore could be misinterpreted. I think that's what you were...
Exactly. And so for people who think that this deepfake is the future, it's already among us today. Manipulated videos that are suggesting to tell a specific story with a political agenda have already been used at the highest level.
And to give us more insight on that and bring his expertise, joining us now live from Brussels is Fabrice Potier. He's a senior advisor at the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity and senior director at Rasmussen Global. It's good to see you there, Fabrice. Now, you predicted a big wave of deepfakes coming our way. Is this the next frontier in disinformation, and how big of a threat is it?
It is the next frontier, and it is closer than we expect. But actually, interestingly, the videos you showed of Obama are not deepfake. They are more the traditional type of video fake, meaning that it involves the video production team. Deepfakes, by essence, will just involve a machine, an algorithm that will, for days or hours, basically roam the internet, use audio and video file to create from scratch a fake video. And this is where it gets very complicated to spot from the real authentic videos to the fake one. And I think what we ought to do is to already prevent that next wave. The reality is we've been always one foreign meddling election too late. We've always looked back. Now we need to look forward and try to prevent the next wave, because the assumption is in a few years' time, this technology will be widely available. And it will not just be countries, it will also be non-state actors, individuals who will be able to fake their way through an election, through a public debate, and to try to distort the truth. So we need to prevent that now so that we are not fooled in a couple of years' time.
I mean, Fabrice, when you're talking about this it's artificial intelligence, it sounds very intelligent. Now the European elections are coming up soon. How do we fight this? Do we use technology as well to fight it?
Well, in principle, you can fight artificial intelligence with artificial intelligence. And the idea here would be to develop, and this is what the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity is trying to do, to develop a kind of detector, a filter system, which will allow you to basically spot whether a video is authentic or whether it has elements that could lead you to think that it's a deep fake. So potentially people could have an app on their iPhone, and they receive a video via WhatsApp, because WhatsApp is going to become the new breeding ground of distortion and fake news. You can scan through the video, your app, in order to know if it's a fake or an authentic video. And I think it's important because people need to have a critical mind. They cannot take everything they receive on WhatsApp, Facebook, wherever, by face value. So this app will help them to exert that critical mind.
All right, thank you very much for that, Fabrice Potier, talking to us live there from Brussels. Marietje, I'll go to you first, because during the debate earlier on the topic, you were one of the few, if not the only one, I don't remember, who actually talked about deepfake. Yes. Do you think that politicians understand the risk, and how big of a risk is it? It is?
I don't think the full scope of all the risks is really appreciated. Deepfake is one thing, but think also about the technologies that are used in the elections themselves. I also called for a stress test of election technologies. And if we look at the US now, there are so many allegations of, what went wrong in the systems during the midterms. It has to be reliable technology if we are going to use technology for voting. So that's another thing. And I also believe that the whole platforms, social media like YouTube, Facebook, that are pushing information for profit, where we don't know who's paying for a message, whether it's a political actor or not. We don't know whether a conspiracy is surfacing or an authentic newscast on, for example, YouTube. And we've seen many horrible examples where the most outrageous messages were surfacing to the top. And there needs to be much more transparency in the algorithms behind these business models, also in order to preserve liberal democracy.
And Jan, you're going into an election campaign and the election also. When we look at this, how ready is the EU? In general, we're talking about disinformation and fake news. How ready is Europe for this? And when it comes to technology, is there maybe a lack of enough tech skill to be able to fight something like this?
The question is, what do you mean by EU? Of course, there are individual political actors, candidates, political parties, and I believe that they should spare some money and they should acquire themselves with relevant devices, with relevant counter-attacking technologies that will help them at least partially to fight this type of fake news in the elections. When it comes to European Parliament or European institutions, I believe that they work enough and that they understand the threat, but you probably cannot order political parties or individual political actors that will participate in the elections to do that. They either do that or don't. My own party is trying to cope with that. I cannot speak on behalf of other political parties.
I mean, is there a need to actually be thinking about this for every politician now to have this in their heads? It could be considered.
Absolutely. And it's our responsibility also to share the best knowledge available. I mean, you know, political parties generally are not very well funded. You know, candidates may not have access to that knowledge, even though they themselves are vulnerable. Also to hacking or, you know, allegations about them that can be used in a campaign context.
And you're positive we can fight this?
We have to do what we can. We have to do what we can. And I think also looking at the position of candidates and political parties vis-a-vis, for example, leaks. You know, we've seen that in the past in the campaign for the presidency here in France, where Macron was, you know, alleged to have all kinds of issues wrong with him. And there the media said, we're not publishing this. 48 hours before the elections, we're not picking up on these alleged leaks. And I think that proved to be a very good defense against those who wanted to very last minute try to distort the debate and try to actually influence the elections in France.
This is certainly something we'll be watching closely when it comes to the European elections. I mean, very sensitive issue on this. All right, here in Strasbourg today, though, the European Parliament picked the winner of its Lux Prize. It's a film competition which aims to shine a spotlight on films which go to the heart of public debate in Europe. And it's also the focus of today's Eurostars.
We could all know Hala. At first glance, she appears to be a regular 50-year-old woman living in rural Iceland. But she's anything but regular. Known as the Woman of the Mountain, Hala leads a double life, waging a secret war on the local aluminium industry. And she's effective, succeeding to put a stop to the installation of a new plant in the Highlands. The director of Women at War, Benedict Erlingsson, won the Lux Prize today. For him, it's all about highlighting women's environmental activism.
Women are often in the front fight of the environmental battle. And in my life, women have always been saving the world, starting with my mothers and grandmothers and so on.
The year's shortlisted films all featured strong female leads. The Other Side of Everything, chronicling the fight against nationalism in Serbia, and Styx, telling the story of a Western doctor's confrontation with a European refugee crisis.
You understand and will obey this instruction.
Confirmed, but I won't leave. Azagrey out.
Well, film is one way to get to the heart of debating issues important in Europe. Jan, you wanted to say something?
Unfortunately, I haven't seen this one, haven't seen any of the other ones. I'm an occasional watcher of the Lux Prize nominee. So I have seen some during last year's, but unfortunately I was too busy for this year. The last movie actually I've seen in a theater was this Bohemian Rhapsody, the biopic of Freddie Mercury.
But this is, I mean, just very quickly on the fact of getting into a debate on a social issue. I mean, is there a lack of it in Europe? Is that why we see social issues, the divide getting bigger, and this is one way of getting to the heart of a debate?
Well, I always welcome debates on issues that matter to people, and I think film, you know, through creativity can spark a different kind of imagination and discussion. So I think it's great. I'm just not convinced that the Parliament should be handing out prizes for cultural productions.
Why is that? Very quickly.
I think we have other things to do. We're not the Oscar jury, but you know, it's a tradition and it's a celebration of European cultural diversity. So I think that's why people appreciate it.
All right, thank you for that. And now more coming up after the break for you. We cross to London for the latest Brexit developments, plus a BBC reporter, some admirably honestly, and why Mr. Blobby was trending today. That's in Wrong Moment. Don't go away. Welcome back to World Politics. Now, on a critical night for Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister has been meeting with her cabinet ministers about a draft Brexit agreement. And I'm joined again by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, and also Matt Carthy from Sinn Féin, who belongs to the group of the European United Left. Okay, Darren, I'll go to you for the latest because, a lot has been going on today. Quick changes. What's happening now?
The cabinet in London, the British cabinet, is still meeting. They're still discussing this deal. I'm told it's because every cabinet minister wants to essentially have on record what their concerns are about the deal or the questions that they raised. All important, of course, when things are revealed in fair light. We also know that Arlene Foster, now she's the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland, who are currently part of a confidence supply deal. They're supporting the Conservative Party, not happy with this agreement. She's demanding a meeting with Theresa May tonight, who is also meant to talk to the Scottish and Welsh leaders. And depending on how long this cabinet goes on for, we are still expecting Dominic Raab to travel to meet Michel Barnier to sign on the deal tonight. And then Michel Barnier is expected here in Strasbourg tomorrow to brief the Brexit steering group on what the deal is. But it all does hinge, of course, on the cabinet tonight agreeing to it. We still think that is likely.
You also spoke to MEPs, didn't you, Darren?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, interesting to gauge opinion here of what people thought of the deal and how it was likely to be received. A mixed response, it must be said. Some saying it's good, we finally got a deal on the table. Others not necessarily convinced. Let's have a watch.
The agreement which has been reached with Theresa May will be used to trap the United Kingdom in a customs union with the EU setting its rules on a whole swathe of issues. It's completely unacceptable. It's not what Theresa May promised the British public at the general election or in her Lancaster House speech, and I hope MPs have the gumption to throw it out.
Well, it's better to have a deal than to have a no deal. Definitely. It's good for Europe and it's good for Great Britain. Of course they should back it. It's better to have an agreement than to go into no man's land.
I mean, I think it's, as I said, it's something we all regret, Brexit, that we are separating. So let's find a solution where everybody can be somewhat satisfied.
I really cannot comment about the details of the deal because I haven't seen it yet. Well, we're in the following situation. We will be, in inverted commas, leaving the European Union. What does that actually mean? It means we will be giving up all of our power and influence. But in order to save our economy, we will be paying into the European Union. And most crucially, we will have to abide by all of the rules, but have no say in them. How can that possibly be put forward as a deal that's equivalent to what we have today or better than what we have today? The best deal that you can get is by remaining in the European Union. We had the best deal.
Matt, I'll go to you. I mean, yesterday and maybe even today, Irish politicians have been very, very tight-lipped. I think maybe not to jinx the deal, but what is the feeling, the sense from Ireland?
Well, I presume it's varied. Obviously, the government have been putting a positive spin on it. For the rest of us, we are going to wait and see exactly what the detail includes, and with a particular emphasis, of course, on what it means for the All-Ireland economy and the All-Ireland agenda, particularly in relation to the North, the status of the North. Remember that the people in the north of Ireland voted to remain part of the European Union by a substantial majority. That wish hasn't been respected by Theresa May, and what we wanted and what we've set out as a party in terms of our positioning, in terms of our lobbying and engagements here at a European level, has been that we wanted to try and ensure that there would be some special arrangements put in place to ensure that the North was, and all of Ireland was able to minimise the damage that Brexit would do, because Brexit's going to be bad for Ireland, sure. no doubt about it. What we need to do is minimise the damage that Brexit will do.
When Arlene Foster of the DUP said that if Theresa May breaks up the UK, there will be consequences, what do you read into what she said?
I think Arlene Foster, not surprisingly for anybody who's been engaging with the DUP, opposed this deal before they even saw what was in it, like the rest of us. So as I say, nobody will be surprised by that. But I will say this, we need to find out whether this deal does what we need it to do. In other words, if it reinforces the commitments that were made in the backstop by protecting our economy, protecting citizens' rights, protecting the Good Friday Agreement. If it does that, and if the British political system agree, well, then we can move forward. But if it doesn't, if one of those two things don't happen, what will happen is that we will require a referendum on a united Ireland to take place in the North. So Arlene Foster needs to be careful.
Yeah, we go back to having to wait for what's in that deal. All right, it's time for tonight's Raw Moment. And if you thought Brexit was confusing, you're not the only one. Let's take a look.
So, where are we in all of this Brexit process? You know what, people like me are paid, aren't we, to have insight and foresight and hindsight about these things and to be able to project where we're going to go. To be quite honest, looking at things right now, I haven't got the foggiest idea what is going to happen in the coming weeks. Is the Prime Minister going to get a deal with the EU? Don't know. Is she going to be able to get it through the Commons? Don't know about that either. I think you might as well get Mr. Blobby back on to offer his analysis, because frankly I suspect his is now as good as mine.
And we also had some fun with Photoshop this afternoon. Let's cross live to Westminster now, where Brexit expert Mr. Blobby is standing by. Do you guys know?
I really hope that people outside of the UK and Ireland know who Mr. Blobby is. I don't know really how best to describe him. I think he was, let's say, in the light entertainment industry years ago. Actually, the Christmas #1 as well. But at least Chris Mason for the BBC, a good friend of mine, was being perfectly honest about this Brexit process. There are so many different cogs and wheels changing. It is almost impossible to predict what is going to happen.
Foggiest. He had the foggiest idea. I love that phrase. All right, we're also hearing that there will be no press conference from Theresa May tonight. We were expecting one, but it looks like we're not going to get it. All right, thank you for watching us tonight on Raw Politics. Do join us again tomorrow with the highlights of the week.